And we're back for another episode of Startup Hustle, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. If you want to start, own, or build a business, then you're in the right place. We bring you the real truth about what it's like to take something from concept to launch. From growth, innovation, experience, failing, or winning big, we've got you covered. So let's get down to business with another episode of Startup Hustle, brought to you by Fullscale.io. And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCourcy here to have another conversation that I'm hoping helps your business grow. All right, people, we're back. It's part 3 of 4 out of our e-commerce series. And today we're going to talk about organizing your e-commerce inventory. Look, I'm going to be honest. You're going to look at the title of this episode. It's not full of fireworks and green flags and gold trophies, but it kind of is. Because you're not going to get to the finish line. You're not going to win that trophy if you don't have a few simple things right in your business. Now, before we get too far into that, remember, this is part of a 4-part series. Now, in part 1, we talked about the history and evolution of e-commerce. And that probably could have been its own 4-part series. So it's nice and condensed. But, you know, the internet and the history of e-commerce, it's not as long, it's not as deep as a lot of people think it is. We moved into the accounting for e-commerce. Today, we're talking about how to manage your e-commerce inventory. And in the thrilling conclusion, we'll talk about leadership skills for e-commerce teams. Now, today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Clearinity. And Clearinity solves the most complex problems in e-commerce through cloud-based inventory management and operations optimization. They've also been kind enough to sponsor this entire series because the solutions that they provide, well, they have a lot to do with you if you're in e-commerce. Now, and this isn't usually the case because the sponsor of today's episode is also our guest. So we have Conrad Rohletter. And Conrad's the founder of Clearinity, and you've heard us talk a lot about him. Scroll down, click the show notes. You can learn more about them. And I have a feeling he's going to tell us a little bit about Clearinity as well. Conrad, welcome to Startup Hustle.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think you hit it off right, which is just our goal here is to help e-commerce clients and help them with inventory. Mostly that's because what we're finding is that inventory is really kind of that pinnacle of all the pieces of your business. When you talk about what's happening in marketing, when you talk about what's happening on the ground in your warehouse, when you talk about now I need to get my accounting, and how does all this come together with the people? You know, we like to say people, process, technology. We want to be right in the middle of those 3 bubbles. You know, that's really what it takes to get cloud inventory done well. So.
Yeah, right. And you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. We're going to get into that, but sure. I think before we get too far, let's talk a little bit about what's your backstory, you know, as the founder of Clearinity and you know, what brought you to want to be passionate about solving problems in the e-commerce industry.
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, it's totally worth saying that e-commerce is a small world and it's somewhat incestuous in that regard. Full disclosure, you know, everyone has heard from Scott and about the e-commerce evolution. And I actually used to work for Catching Clouds. I was hired on as their tech guy. And my job at the time was to really help clients solve the cost of goods sold problem. So I was there running spreadsheets for, you know, a couple dozen clients a month and trying to help everyone figure out how do we get to this effective accounting information. And during that time, that's when I was able to sit back and just observe as clients of various different sizes and growth stages as they went through this challenge of saying, how do I get my hands around my inventory and my operations? And so during that time, I was able to sit back and say, cool, it seems like guys need some more help here. That e-commerce clients are always strapped. They're strapped for cash. They're strapped for time. They're always needing a little extra help somewhere and someone who's got a lot of expertise in this area. Because of my experience in helping calculate cost of goods sold, I had the opportunity to be able to sit back and see the inside of almost 30 separate cloud inventory platforms and say, how does each one of these guys do it? And why are they different? And why do some clients succeed and some clients fail on various platforms? So that's just the short story of how we said, look, we really need to go ahead and establish ourselves as those experts, because we have skill sets and tools here that not a lot of other teams can bring together. We'd like to offer that as a service and help e-commerce companies really continue to evolve. So here we are a couple of years later.
There's a funny story that I probably have told at some point over 400 episodes, but it has to do with understanding how things work. And it's Thomas Edison had invented some electric generators, and one of them was connected to Niagara Falls. And at some point, something broke, and they couldn't fix it. So they call him in, and he arrives, and there's engineers. They're on top of this thing. They're on the side of it. They're underneath it. Someone's looking at like the owner's manual or something.
Sure.
And no one can figure out how to get this thing started. So he walks up and he's, all right, everybody, get out of the way. And he walks over to a toolbox, and he picks up a big ball peen hammer, and he kind of walks around to the side. He looks underneath it, and he reaches up, he touches something, and then he winds up and he just smacks this thing with the hammer, and it starts right up.
Sure.
Now, the next day, he sends the city of Niagara a bill for $10,000. Then it said repairing generator. And
sure.
So they sent it, that was it. And they sent it back, and they asked for him to list the line items associated with this $10,000 invoice. So he did. He sent the bill back. He said, hitting generator with hammer, $1. Knowing where to hit generator with hammer, $9,999. Right. But the thing is and that's a prudent story, because sometimes knowing where to hit it with the hammer is the most valuable part of so much when it comes to being an entrepreneur and getting set up. And I've talked about this in the other episodes, because I've worked with I've had an e-commerce business. I've worked with several. I've done a lot of different stuff, and like there's just so many things that you need to do, and there's so many potential things to integrate, to set up, to consider. Like even in there's probably someone that was listening to episode 2 and immediately called an accountant afterward, because it's like just in that category alone, and that's not even related to the tech and all that other stuff. There's so many things to keep up with and so many things to understand. Now, when it comes to your inventory, I mean, that's your money. And you gotta keep in mind that, and there's a lot of things, and we'll get into some of that too, but it kind of shocks me, because I've have a history. At one point, I managed a chain of musical instrument retail stores. And I managed a section of 17 different stores. And oh man, to say that inventory was under control was probably not accurate.
Sure.
Now I worked in pianos and keyboards. Those were a lot easier to keep. It's hard to lose a grand piano.
Sure.
But the other side of the store, which had guitars, picks, strings, things like that, oh man, that was a freaking nightmare. And at one point, the company that I worked for got acquired by a larger chain, and sheet music was something that we sold there. And now the thing is they realized they had 250,000 SKUs company-wide. Mm-hmm. And it came time to do inventory, and they actually deemed that, and this was a smart move, they deemed that they didn't want to sell this product anymore, and it would be way more expensive to inventory it than it would to just sell it by the pound. So it was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. They're literally selling sheet music by the pound.
Wow.
And that was just to get rid of it. But it was early in my career, that was a realization of what can happen when inventory gets really broad and really wide. And you think about 250,000 SKUs, and SKU stands for stock keeping unit. Mm-hmm. And that particular, like if you have to count 250,000 of anything, the value of that was far higher than, or the cost of that was far higher than the value of the inventory. So, with everything's in the cloud now. So can you start by giving us what is a cloud inventory system?
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to call back too much to episode 1, but basically there's been evolution in our sales channels as much as there's been evolution in our back end, databases and structures. So case in point, one of the big names for the last 10 years has been Fishbowl. And they offered a great cloud inventory. It was not cloud-based, but it is an inventory management system. You had to have the servers at your installation, and basically if your server went down locally because someone unplugged it, that was that. So to your point, like what is cloud? Essentially, that's where we said, hey, let's go to, the AWS servers or the Google servers or whatever cloud-based server architecture we can. And let's figure out how to architect these solutions so that way they can interact across the internet instead of across local networks. So, this is all kind of like the geeky computer software stuff, but what we are finding is that this makes a huge difference, that you can now have disparate inventory pools. You can have people in other states, and you can talk more fluidly about inventory without having to have a guy on staff who knows how to, configure hardware and ports and the, networking and all that kind of stuff. So, I don't know. Do you feel like that answers the question, or?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it's it's funny because with technology and the growth of the internet and stuff, it's the layman or someone who's not a quote air quotes here tech person,
right,
should feel relieved, because what you just mentioned, you're talking about an on-site server. Okay, well, that's immediately problematic for a number of different reasons that many people don't think about. And sometimes the first one is just general updates for the software and to help the hardware run. And another thing too is, I'm old enough to remember the on-site servers like everywhere,
sure,
often like in a cage, sometimes just like sitting like on a desk or something, and people not even realizing like that's the heart. Like on many moments, that is literally the heart, like the organ, the heart,
yeah,
like not just figurative. If that thing stops running, so does everything else. And there was this always, like you mentioned, like the IT guy or some company that would have to do it. And the thing was, it was just never a fast solution. So the server would go down, and next thing you know, you've got an entire store that can't
exactly.
do business. And
Exactly.
And then the sophistication of computing and the internet has really gone really fast. And I remember at first, these old like DOS based systems that you like, and it was funny because as a manager, they were infuriating because you'd get a new employee and you'd be like, well, why does this person know how to use register? Well, we're trying to train them. Okay, how long does that take? Well, it takes a while. Well, show me why. Well, because when you go here, you have to hit F5 to get to this other screen. And I'm immediately on step 1 going, how would I have ever known that?
Exactly.
And there was just so much stuff. And, the connectivity of different things has been a challenge. And that's what's been kind of fun and interesting about the internet and software over the last 5 years, especially, is the ease and speed at which integrations can occur on some levels. But at the same time, you have to have they don't always solve the issue of like, well, I want to say the strategy behind it and the implementation.
Sure.
Software and hardware are tools to help us be better at what we do as people. They're not, in most cases, they're not sophisticated enough to help us solve the problems like, hey, you do still need to receive inventory into the system and do a couple other things. And then that's what I want to talk about, is just like some of the basic stuff. And when it comes to your own inventory,
sure,
it's either coming in because you're buying it, or you could be building it.
correct,
and then you sell it. So, what are some of the basics that we need to get into when it comes to effectively managing or organizing our e-commerce inventory?
Yeah, well, and let's start with some name dropping here, just so that way people kind of get an idea of like, what are we talking about? I mentioned Fishbowl. Some of the other big names that are cloud-based that we like to work with are things like Deer Systems, Unleashed Software, Locate Inventory, Skubana, Stitch Labs. Like, these are the names you guys will see when you go to Google and you're like, cloud inventory, what is it? There's something that is common amongst all of these, which is that, as Matt said, like you got to start with a purchase order. Okay. Sometimes they even have different names for what these things are, but the industry, the accounting industry especially, has always said, look, that's what we call a purchase order. This is where you take record of the fact that you want to buy 100 widgets at this price from that vendor, right? And it's just that simple to start. You got to get it written down. And this is one of those things that we recognize is always the missing piece if a client like hasn't really started. Like this is one of the big missing pieces is they're probably not writing down their purchase orders. What they're probably doing is calling up the vendor saying, hey, can you send me this? And they go, great. And then they get an invoice into their inbox and then forward that on to their accountant and say, let the accountant figure that out. It's like, okay, we got some things we can talk about there. But the point is you got to get this written down because we also want to do some double checks against all this stuff. What did you actually receive? What were you actually billed versus what did you intend to purchase well before that, right? So there's a whole bubble called purchase orders that we focus on very heavily. Another huge piece is just categorizing and cataloging, hence the SKU catalog. Just getting a list of all the products that you guys have said, we as a company agree to sell, procure and sell these products. You got to get that written down somewhere. And sometimes what we're recognizing, especially if people build their own product, they might have the products that they sell listed somewhere in a database. It's on Shopify, it's on Amazon, but they haven't really taken the time to write down all the 7,000 little pieces that they need to build their final products, right? So these are just examples of things that we tackle when we talk about your SKU catalog and listing your products and getting that all written down. And then finally is, cool, what are you going to go do out in your warehouse? Whether you own the warehouse or whether that's someone else's, 3PL, third-party logistics, that's a vendor helping you fulfill your product. There's a lot to parse through about, cool, now we have product in our warehouse. How the heck do we get it out the door? What's the best way for us? There's not a single answer to any one of these buckets here, so...
There's a lot of wins and losses made at the point of the purchase order. And, I mentioned that having worked at retail, I went to work for the wholesale side after that, and then later had an e-commerce business. So I got a pretty well-rounded view of the purchase order. I mean, most vendors aren't even going to fulfill your order without a purchase order. That's because they need it too, and it's the proof that you actually ordered it. Now, right. One of the things is, and you mentioned like, okay, here comes my I phone in an order, and here comes my invoice to my inbox, and you send it to someone else that will quote do it later. Yeah, that's immediately flawed. Because the problem is without it, in the rules that I've always had at my businesses is the moment a purchase order needs to be created within the system that tracks it. And it needs to be done the moment that you've requested it or done something with it, because otherwise it's real easy to forget. And now it's one thing if you're a business that just like orders one thing. Now at all the businesses I mentioned, on some days I would have hundreds of purchase orders. So and then there are some people that sell things as that are somewhat virtual. And that the third of my businesses, which was event ticketing. I mean, we could, like, if we didn't track the purchase order right away, we could forget we even ordered it. And then that's a PDF somewhere, like in a Ticketmaster account or something. And you could just literally, if we lost purchase orders, could be out hundreds or thousands of dollars and not even know it until we went to go reconcile our credit cards. Now, as we mentioned, today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Clearinity, and that happens to be Conrad's company. And, if you need to get a handle on your company's growth, well, he can help you, and so can Clearinity. There's a lot of stuff, as we mentioned, that goes into running a successful e-commerce business. And some of it, too, is even just like what we're talking about is creating some SOPs or some standard operating procedures. Now, that's something you help clients with, right?
Absolutely. And that's kind of an interesting story because my longer tail background is, lots of various different jobs, things like rural America, which is where I grew up, but then eventually chemical engineering is actually my studied background in college. And through that, I got to really see how engineers sort of break down the world, compartmentalize it, and then, like we said, write a standard operating procedure that says, cool, here's how we want to make this process repeatable. And this is what it means to be able to say, this is a scalable process. So yeah, we will basically, the Clearinity process is we help you guys make the smarter decisions and understand the nuances between all the software. We'll get you implemented. And then we say, cool, now that you guys are implemented, here's the way your team is using it. Let's help you guys write some good SOPs that everyone can really get their hands on and say, yes, like we all see this the same way. We all do the work the same way. And we understand the value to each step along the way. And it's not just a laundry list of things that you have to slug through, So
when it comes to creating SOPs at a newer business, as I continue to open businesses and exit or start them, I've gained an appreciation for that over the years. Now, with my current business, Full Scale, grew to nearly 200 employees in 2 years. And I'll tell you what, we started right away, like literally like right away with SOP and everything. And I'll tell you what, if we hadn't have done that, it could have been a real train wreck. And that was I did that because based off an experience I talked about in episode 2 with Brittany, because at one point when my event ticket business had grown so quickly, I had created such a ball of rubber bands when it came to purchase orders, all of it, that we basically had to shut the business down for 2 weeks at one point to say, hey, we're moving. We had to stop buying stuff. Some of our stuff was still for sale, but we had to stop to untangle that knot. And it was painful, man, because we missed a lot of opportunity. And now sometimes you can't avoid that, but that's the whole purpose of this series, is to try to give you a little bit of insight. Now, a lot of this stuff, look, it's not sexy. It doesn't sound like, oh, wow, you sold your company for $150 million and stuff like that. But here's the thing, you're never going to get an opportunity to sell your company for $150 million if it's a freaking train wreck. And, there's just so many things that not having your accounting together, having all of that, your inventory management, all that stuff is all interconnected. And the issue that exists if that doesn't occur is, well, A, you're really in a risky situation, but you're going to limit your ability to do things like get loans, possibly create partnerships. You talk about Amazon being a huge part. You talk about, third-party logistics and stuff like that. I mean, on some levels, you get vetted as a business as you get big as to whether or not you're going to be able to handle the relationship that you're seeking. And if and look, these people Conrad, you mentioned, having getting an eagle eye view into like 30 different systems and 30 different things. And that's that. But the thing is I'm willing to bet that 80% of the process of all of that was very vanilla. And people take different twists at it. But the thing, my point here is if you don't get that stuff right, and anyone ever wants to come in and look at it, and that's what has something to do with whether or not you're getting a loan, a lease, acquisition, or in some cases a huge partnership, they know, because they can look. They're like, oh, whoa, And you mentioned figuring cost of goods. Like, well, that's different. Well, shouldn't that just be the purchase price of the inventory? No. Right. I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it. Because there's people that receive it, there's shipping costs, there's storage, there's like a whole lot of different things. So, now obviously, so we've talked about purchasing stuff, and you mentioned, warehouse logistics. We don't even have enough time on that, but but there's so much that has to do with that, and it's like, I mean, Amazon's is very well publicized for their warehouse efficiency, and they look at things like, okay, is this employee taking 2 extra steps? And you're like, oh, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you have 1 million employees, and every action is 2 extra steps, and they do that action 200 times a day, then the value of all those steps, it would probably run circles around the world. So is there anything that Clearinity regularly sees or helps clients fix when it comes to warehouse stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is understanding that we deal with a really wide breadth of clients, and it's so wide that we've kind of had to like chunk them out into like groups, and we say, hey, there's really a progression, an evolution between zero, and $100+ million a year top line revenue. So what we really try and do is like sort of break it down and say, which of 7 growth stages are you guys in? Let's examine it from that perspective first. So sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, we don't have SKUs on any of our products at all. Maybe we're doing stuff in the warehouse, but we're not using SKUs. We're not using barcodes. We don't have any of these types of things that like databases and computer systems just love to have this type of structure. This is actually a really healthy, important thing that we as a team want to solve with you. It's like, what is the best and most appropriate structure for your company? So sometimes it even just starts there when we're talking these stages like 1 through 3. One of the other big dimensions is, are you guys using your own warehouse or are you using a 3PL? One of the inherent assumptions is, oh yeah, well, we use a 3PL. They handle everything for us. And I say, great. How do you know that they haven't lost your product? How do you know that they're doing their job and you're on top of that piece over there? And they go, yeah, we don't have a system for that. It's like, all right, well, that's its own like, dog leg that we could go down. But kind of bringing it back to your question, when we talk about the warehouse, if you own your own warehouse, there's all sorts of different things, and it comes back to saying, hey, do we have the right system in the first place? So case in point, we're working a lot with Locate Inventory right now, and they have a really robust inventory management system for warehouses, and they can help you break down every like row, shelf, aisle, bucket, and track product all the way down to, I stuck it in the 5th cubby of this drawer on this rack on that wall, if you need to do that kind of thing. So there's really just this huge breadth of like, where are you at today versus where do you need to get? And then all those other things you're talking about, like, how do you navigate through the warehouse? Do you, like, is everyone going in the same direction? Do they cross directions? Like, how many times do we have to go down this aisle while we skip over this product? Like, there's, like you said, we could be here for a week talking about all the things and the nuances you could get into with internal warehouse management. So, yeah.
I think the important thing is for if you have an e-commerce business that's growing or you want to start one, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel on that one.
Correct.
There's literally the history of commerce is there. And that's like where companies like Clearinity want to help. Rapidly growing businesses require that you learn a lot of stuff really fast. And some of this stuff is like, does not need to be reinvented. Mm-hmm. Now, so you can lose on the PO, you can lose on the fulfillment too, because shipping the wrong stuff is terrible. Not shipping it on time is terrible. Amazon changed the expectation of just online buying altogether with Prime and how quickly that it arrives. Now you say when you mentioned 3PL, so third-party logistics, and I think it's important that we give a little idea of what that is. So if you send your stuff to Amazon and they sell it, then that's third-party logistics. And then there's other, so that means they're going to take a big piece. So people sometimes be like, oh, they take so much of my money. Yeah, but they're also doing stuff for you that you would have to hire people to do or do yourself. So you have to make that decision. There are other fulfillment centers and other, like, let's just put it this way. A lot of e-commerce businesses realize pretty quick and pretty early that part of their business is not something they want to deal with. Mm-hmm. It's not something that they enjoy doing. And it might just be something that they just say, hey, you know what? We're never going to be great at this. So, I mean, that decision's up to you as an e-commerce owner, but I think that you subject yourself to a lot of liability and a lot of learning curve if you're not considering 3PL. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the same way, or do you advise that people like run their own warehouse?
Right. So I think, of course, it depends on your product, right? Like I've got one client right now that they sell really big home goods. They've thought a lot about going to a 3PL, but the big carriers, like, these are just huge boxy like tables and stuff like that. That's a different scenario, right? But like, if I've got these little widgets that fit nicely in a USPS box and you can just get it out the door hundreds at a time, to me, that's a no-brainer about like, yeah, like let's go talk to a 3PL. Notice that they are just as diverse in their service offerings as all the cloud inventories and every other vendor relationship you may engage in. So there's still a right fit and a wrong fit for getting to the right 3PL, but they do unlock like a serious amount of potential that, for instance, you're thinking right now, like, I don't know, should I go to a 3PL? That's good, that's healthy. But 3 years from now, when you've established a great relationship with a 3PL that has a lot of, scope and breadth, then you'll be having those really nuanced conversations about like, hey, you know what? We started over here on the East Coast and we only used your East Coast warehouses. We're doing so well 3 years later that we want to make sure that we have some of our product in your West Coast warehouses too. So we can offer better shipping rates. So we can offer shorter, delivery times, whatever it may be. You can really start to get into really complex operational discussions and still be money ahead if you're not running your own warehouse. But again, it all depends on your product and what's going to make the most sense for your company. So we want to help clients like really solve what is best for our company,
So I've had a couple of people that say, well, I'm low volume as an e-commerce, so I just like to do the shipping myself. And I'm like, I honestly think that's the worst, because I'll use my own books as an example. I'd love to tell you I sold like dozens or hundreds a day, but we don't. Now, if I fulfilled my own book orders, that means that every day I'd have to stop what I was doing and probably print 1 to 3 shipping labels. And then I have to deal with that. And then, it's like, it's just the whole, and the thing is that what if you miss a day? Right. So then you miss a day. Now I got to do more of it. And if God forbid you go on vacation,
right.
Because what are you going to do? Just turn it off. So the thing is I think the 3PL is a great leveraging tool early. Now, if your volume gets to the point where you're like, oh, wow, like you can look at that a little differently. And then, as you mentioned, there are certain things that just aren't really made for that, that are a little more difficult, and they're usually sizable. Sure. And, I had talked to someone at one point, is it drinking fountains, and it was like, so the replacement parts would have been great for a 3PL, but like the fountains themselves, because, well, here's the thing is you're at first thinking they're big. No, they contain Freon. So they're the shipping and the cooling stuff, it's a different requirement. So it's like, it requires a whole different, you got to take a look at it now. And that's a perfect segue into intelligence, which is understanding your business, how it works, and the stats that go with it. Where do you want to start there, good sir? Because we could go, that's once again, worthy of possibly its own series as well.
Oh, definitely. And I think where I would start is something that I tell all the clients is that typically they come to me because, they've been talking to their accountant and their accountant was able to hear, hey, you have an inventory problem, go talk to Clearinity. And so that's probably typically how it comes through. And they say, well, I'm trying to get this sort of detail on my books, or I'm still trying to understand X, Y, and Z. And typically I pause and I'll say, okay, where do you draw the line between accounting and business intelligence? And everyone kind of draws this line in a different spot. But I know from my experience, my typical answer is, hey, if we can summarize it and push it to your books and it ends up on the P&L or the balance sheet or your cash flow statement, that's accounting. And pretty much everything else, which is most of your information that you're going to care about as a business owner, that's what I classify as business intelligence. Okay. So like a really simple case in point here is that an old way of doing accounting is that people would try and push detail onto the books around revenue and COGS. So they would try to say, for this product, I put it in chart of account 101, and this product is in 102 and 103, et cetera. This is an example where we say, hold on, we're going to draw that line in a different spot. And if you're trying to understand your profitability per product, that's an example of business intelligence, and that belongs 100% in your cloud inventory solution. That's where you should really get that, because that will have a smarter cost algorithm and understanding how you're doing it. They're going to know all the other things about, oh, did you just chuck out a bunch of product? Did we need to change your costing? Do we need to add all the extra stuff on top? There's a whole bunch of stuff that they want to know. At the end of the day, the only thing that should really go to your books is we made $10 million in revenue, and 400,000 of that was cost of goods sold. That's the kind of thing that should end up in accounting. All those other details. Is this moving fast? Did this do well this month? How's this doing versus that thing? That's all business intelligence. And that's where we say, yeah, cloud inventory is built for that. Like, let's use that instead,
And so much of the business intelligence and being stats driven is what we're going to talk about in episode 4. And just, having, some of that starting with the basic familiarity with technology, but learning how to use so the product side of things is only one part of it, because the same business intelligence affects everything. It's going to be driven by your marketing, especially digital stuff, and creating data-driven strategies and understanding trends, obtaining insight, tracking sales, predicting revenue. And the thing is when it gets to inventory, there's another tricky thing. So and this is where just talking about putting inventory in its own bucket, you have, because it's different if you are just a reseller of a product. Like, let's just say you just sell toys and you buy them from Hasbro. That's different than if you make the toys for Hasbro or them making them. And the why. So what you were just talking about was easily my least favorite class ever in school. I'm not sure if I ever successfully passed it. It's called managerial accounting. And managerial accounting is, you use the term widgets. Sure. They love widgets. Acme Corp makes widgets. Oh God, if you ever went to business school for a day and took an accounting class, then you know that Acme Corp makes widgets. What are they? No one knows. They're widgets. But that's just an anything. And the one thing that I did learn from a lot of that stuff is you can look at everything as a widget, and you're Acme Corp. So managerial accounting, the reason it was tough was you talk about getting a true cost of goods, especially in a manufacturing business. It's different because some people may assemble things faster than others, like all different. It just goes on. And that's what I hated about it. I'm like, can't we just total them all up at the end and divide it by 8 or whatever? And, that's not technically how it goes. Now, business intelligence, or BI, is a really emerging field when it comes to a lot of different industries and businesses. It's ripe for use with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Why? Because it's data, it's numbers, it's zeros and ones per se, but they're not technically zeros and ones. But computers and algorithms and machines, they don't look at things with they're not prejudiced. And I say prejudiced in a way that, biased, because as people, I've talked to a lot of business owners. One e-commerce example, had a client that was positive that they were making money off shipping. And I said, man, that's a pretty big assumption considering the volume that you're doing, because they were charging a set price per order. And they said, yeah, but we make money on it. And I was like, are you sure? Because I just looked at like one day worth of shipping receipts, and most of them were over $20. Sure. And and the thing is they were like, yeah, I'm positive that we're making money. Well, not only were they not making money, they were losing like $50,000 a year. So you talk about just sometimes simple things. I was like, and they were using a popular online e-commerce platform. I was like, well, there's a setting in there. You can just collect a buyer's zip code. Sure. And it'll calculate the shipping, and with one little click of a button and a little bit of thought and some business intelligence, they save $50,000 a year. And so, but this is my point, like knowing where to hit it with the hammer. Yes, that's the whole thing. We talked about that in episode 2 as well, when it came to merchant fees and costs. Like when you get to a specific volume, like a different consulting job had a client that was doing a lot of PayPal. And that was just how they were, and they were like, oh, they get us. They take 3% or whatever. I was like, at your volume, they probably would take 1.8, which was once again a setting. And these are face palm moments, people. And when I say face palm, when you're like, you bury your face into your palm and you go, oh my God. Now here's the thing: they're not going to get, PayPal's not going to go back and give you. They're not. Oh, you should have done that a long time ago. Let us send you all that money, but. The thing is 1% of $1 million. Well, it's a lot.
Yep.
It's a lot.
Yep.
And you start to look and businesses are become saving money is making money. And I it's amazing how many people I talk to, they're revenue. I'm like, well, what about the other side of that? What about what you spend? And that's that business intelligence is more accessible than it's ever been. And now, if you don't know how to use it, call Conrad. Scroll down the show notes. There's people that'll show you how to do it. But it's really kind of the thing going forward, and it's something you got to know about. Now, with that, any type of BI or business intelligence, you are going to have some level of reporting, and reporting in your business is going to have everything. Now, that has everything to do with accounting, has everything to do with inventory management, and all that stuff tied together. So let's talk about Clearinity and some of the problems that you frequently solve when it comes to reporting.
Yeah.
Other than someone just not having any.
Yeah. Well, and I think a really simple example, like I was reading on someone's post on LinkedIn, they said, hey, for instance, if you're using Shopify, which is a great platform, they're going to have some level of reporting in there. But typically the reporting that's coming out of platforms like that isn't necessarily geared at like helping you make the best decision. It's really just kind of like there as like, hey, proving that they're doing their job, right? So for instance, if you're on Shopify, yeah, you'll get some counts. Yeah, you get some revenue numbers, and those are good and valuable things. But if we really dig into those things, especially if you've got more than Shopify, all of a sudden you're hosed because you have reporting from like 10 different platforms. That Shopify reporting is specific to Shopify. So case in point, if we get into cloud inventory, one of the big things that it offers is that it's truly infrastructure for your business, and it's going to help you aggregate all of that information in one single location. So just having that alone is in and of itself a huge win. Plus, it's going to do all these other like really complex things that, yeah, on Shopify, you'll know your revenue and you know what you sold, but Shopify doesn't know how you purchased that and what your moving average cost or your FIFO cost or whatever cost you're trying to use. They don't know any of that. And they're like, good luck, Chuck. Go figure that out yourself. With cloud inventory, that's all centralized. You've put in your POs. They're tracking all your movements. They know your FIFO or your moving average cost. They're going to give you the most accurate per unit margin calculation that you can possibly have, So I think that's just one of the like most simple examples of, hey, let's start there because you probably don't even have that yet. That's normal. This is part of the evolution and the growth process for any business. So other things that we often run into are, great, now we've got our margins. Now I want to add, segmentation of my products. I want to add metadata or whatever you want to call this. I want to be able to say, I want to group all my tables and see how my tables perform versus my chairs versus my beds. Whatever's going to help you make smarter decisions for your business, that's a great one, Similarly, probably everyone has heard some variation of this, that if you sell 1,000 products, it's probably your top 20%, so 200 products, that do 80% of your revenue. Okay. Well, again, if you're selling across multiple sales channels, it's kind of hard to know which one is actually falls into your top 20% versus not, So we get some kinds of some various segmentation details, some various like reporting in that way. Another simple one that we work clients through a lot is like you were saying, BI is kind of it's a huge thing, right? But what we're noticing is there are now subdivisions, even in the world of BI, that, for instance, forecasting is a totally different BI endeavor than simply recording what actually happened. So even if you just drew a line between we're trying to predict the future and this is what happened in the past, you can come up with different scenarios. So case in point, people are always saying, well, we know we're doing pretty good on sales, like you mentioned, and there's AI and other stuff out there that should be able to help us. What's one of the better tools to help? That's where we turn to tools like Inventory Planner that totally help people say, I've got multiple sales channels. How much should my next purchase order be for? How many actual units? Because right now you're probably doing it on a gut check or on some guy's spreadsheet buried in 7 folders deep, and you're not really sure how to run that if that guy, won the lottery or got hit by a bus, whatever your favorite flavor of that phrase is, so even that kind of a thing where we can say, hey, look, leave past intelligence to one thing, but if you're really trying to be predictive, there are still better tools, there are better approaches, there are better statistical methodologies that we can employ to help you find the right answer for your team,
So with me today, I've got Conrad Rohlatter, and Conrad's the founder of Clearinity, who's also the sponsor of today's episode of Startup Hustle. And just as a reminder, Clearinity solves the most complex problems in e-commerce. It can help you with cloud-based inventory management, tech they can help you implement your tech. There you go. God, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I start saying too much of it, but hey, if I can't even say it, think about what it's going to be like to try to do it on your own. Now, it also helps with operations optimization and a whole lot of other things. I mean, overall, like there's a lot to be said. And before we move to the end of this episode, which I think is a great, so much of what we talked about is, just defining what a cloud inventory system is, the importance of having some standard operating procedures related to purchase orders, your warehouse and fulfillment process, intelligence and reporting. And that ties into a lot of the stuff that we talked about in episode 2 with Brittany regarding accounting. And, this stuff all leads in. Now, the one thing and the thing that I think is the great place to finish this off is integrations. And, all this stuff in episode 2, Brittany stated, if you are talking to an accountant that says that you shouldn't, couldn't, or won't be able to integrate your bank account or your credit cards with simple things like QuickBooks, and you're talking to the wrong accountant, I got to say that same rule applies when it comes to your e-commerce business. And I've unwound a few knots. I mean, I've helped people that had a web store and a point of sale that weren't connected. Like they had a store and a web store, and they were like managing 2 different systems, and they weren't connected. And just simple stuff like that, and seeing the amount of pain and agony and work and expense that they went through to keep up with stuff like this. Now, this is the beauty of the cloud world.
Sure.
And where if you don't know how to integrate your stuff, call Clearinity. They'll give you some help. Now, as far as integrations go, we're in a very connected world. And if you're going to be in the e-commerce business, and part of what we're going to talk about in episode 4 as well is, like, if you want to lead a team or grow a business, you're going to have some basic understanding of tech. And if you're one of those people that's like, I'm not a tech person, you're going to need to either become one and get a basic understanding of it. I tell people I don't write code, I write checks. It's okay but I understand tech.
Sure.
And what it can do, when to buy, when to build, when to do a lot of different stuff. So when it comes to integrations, I'm assuming you agree with the utmost importance of embracing them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the big challenges that we're recognizing in cloud inventory, though, to call back to episode 1 here and the evolution, is that, what Brittany's saying in episode 2 is totally true. Like, you should be able to integrate your bank to your general ledger, QuickBooks, Xero, whatever your flavor is. That should be a no-brainer. There's a lot of other stuff around accounting that integrates superbly well. However, when it comes to cloud inventory, they're still really generally learning about, hey, if we offer so many ways to solve the inventory problem, integrating to the general ledger offers some particular challenges. And so what we say is that, if you're a real small business, yes, you should absolutely 100% use the default connector between Cloud Inventory X and your general ledger. If there's ways that you can segment it and say push things like just your purchase orders, what Brittany was talking about with revenues and fees and all that, like that type of granularity is not handled very well with the cloud inventory today. So what we suggest is that, hey, once you cross a certain boundary, the most successful clients we've ever seen are those who become real good friends with a software developer, because these cloud inventory, they say, hey, look, you know what? We hear you guys. We understand that there's extra granularity we could do. But what we're going to do is we're going to offer you an open API, meaning you can bring in your developer. And with all your business rules, you can use that cloud inventory API, and then you can build yourself a specific piece of software that will help you get over to the other side and do all the other things and database all the pieces. So this is one of those other things that we help people through quite a bit with our knowledge of software development is like, hey, when do you use the out-of-the-box solution versus nope, if you're talking about needing to do X, Y, and Z, it just won't handle it. Be ready to talk with a software developer and make an investment, So.
Yeah. And some of that, I too many people think that software just that we mentioned Shopify earlier, and like that's an e-commerce store framework. Like,
yes.
And at some point they have to draw the line because, like, as someone, all right. So I went through this with as the founder of Gigabook. Like, Gigabook's an appointment booking platform, and Conrad, you used it to book this recording. Now that said, we can collect payments, we can do a lot of stuff, but I got to tell you, I've been down that rabbit hole for almost 7 years now, and it doesn't end.
Sure.
So, it's very difficult to find, I've talked to people that are like, oh, my software only does 90% of what I need it to do. I'm like, man, that's a huge win. Awesome. They're like, what?
Yeah.
Shouldn't it do everything? I'm like, 90%, like, congratulations.
Yes.
Like, sometimes the reaction I've given to people on that is not what they're expecting because they think it should do it all. Now that's where the world of integration comes in. And I remember it was, so Zapier or Zapier, however you want to say it, is a very commonly used tool to integrate simple stuff like your Google Sheets with something else. And now, and I remember when Zapier still had 300 integrations, which is a ton still, and now they have probably 20 times more of that. But with that, there's an unlimited number of things that need to connect to an unlimited number of other things. And the problem is as software developers and founders and entrepreneurs, you can't build an integration for everything. So there are some tools out there that can help with that. And we run into that at Gigabook. People are like, they're like, do you integrate with this? And you want to be like, not only do we not integrate with it, we've never heard of it.
Sure.
And that's common. But so an API is that's an application programming interface.
Thank you.
Basically, in layman's terms, that is a drawbridge in and out of your system that enables access for data to flow from here to there. And that's it can be tricky. And that's and some of that, if you don't have you'll have some things that are like, hey, click here to connect. Okay, those are what they are. But if your business becomes a lot more sophisticated and needs to do a little bit more, like you mentioned, there are some solutions. And sometimes, you talk about, oh my God, I can't afford that. You might be able to. You might be surprised because a lot of times once you some stuff, I like to say software is never done.
Right.
But in some cases, little connectors and pieces like that, someone that knows what they're doing can make those happen, and they don't require like multi-million-dollar investments.
Sure.
And once again, back to knowing where to hit it with the hammer. So find someone that knows where to hit it with the hammer. Now, Conrad, since you happen to be the founder of Clearinity, and once again, thank you for sponsoring the show. If you want to learn more about what Conrad and his business do, scroll down, click the link in the show notes. Can help you with a lot of stuff. Now, we end episodes, when we do founder episodes, we have the founder freestyle. So I don't want you to miss out on that, my friend.
Okay.
So as a founder
Sure.
of a business, what's the best advice that you can give any founder of an e-commerce business?
Interesting. So I think there's a couple of different routes that I could go down here, but the number one is that recognizing if you're crazy enough to start a business, like me and so many others, that it's going to be a wild ride. And the number one trait that I've seen amongst any successful entrepreneur is tenacity. You've got to be able to just stick with it and ride out the highs and the lows, because there's going to be some high highs, there's going to be some low lows, and there's going to be a lot of great stuff in the middle too, So just like take it one day at a time. And even if you're looking to take over the world and have the biggest business ever, you got to start small and you got to prove it every single day. And you just got to come to work and be ready to work every single day, you know?
Well, if you listen to Startup Hustle, you know we're all about talking about the ups and downs, and
Yeah.
and there's a lot of them, and it's and I'll kind of parlay off what you said there because at one point, COVID threw everyone a curveball, and I'm kind of over talking about the whole thing because we're all kind of in the same thing. But at one point, my wife was like, "You seem to be handling the stress really well." I was like, "I've been an entrepreneur for well over for a long time." And I just know that whether it's a pandemic, if it's not that, it's always something, and we say that a lot around our office. It's like, it's always got to be something. And it always will be. And, you want to try to mitigate certain things. And, and check out the Startup Hustle chat on Facebook because I actually posted a image the other day that said, what's the best advice you could give to an entrepreneur? And my advice was similar to yours. Be aware that things are going to change, that they're going to go up and down. They'll take longer. They'll cost more.
Yep.
When business school wants to teach you that it goes A to B to D to C to E to F to G.
Yeah.
That's never the way it works. Never in the history of business has anything gone according to plan. And at least that's my opinion on it. I did another poll in the Startup Hustle chat about that. I said, what percentage of your business plan went according to plan? And, hang on, I'll actually find the stats on that because I think that over 50% of those that voted had claimed that they got that 1 to 33%.
That sounds
like, think about that. Like, and these are people this is your community, people. This is like listeners just like you that were commenting on that poll. So, all right, here we go. What was the hardest part when you started your business? 26 votes for figuring out what the hell you were doing. 13 votes for finding capital. 9 votes for finding your first customer was the hardest. And then 1 vote for finding the courage to do it. Now, I mean, you think about that and as far as the business plan, this is even worse. So I asked how much of your original business plan was accurate. 28 votes for 1 to 33%, 14 votes for 71 to 90. And I want to challenge all those people.
That's crazy.
To prove it. I just want to comment with you, prove it. 11 votes for 34 to 70. Now I can buy that. 2 votes for 0% and no votes for 90% or higher. So
that sounds right.
Yeah. I mean, and we love quoting Mike Tyson. Everyone had a plan until they got punched in the face. Yep. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here because I realize I got a lot of stuff to do. I got to get my shit together. So I'll see you next time, man.
Love it. Thanks, Matt.